The beeping sounds wouldn't stop. My eyes felt heavy like someone put rocks on them. When I finally opened them, everything looked fuzzy and white. Then I saw my oldest son standing by my bed. He wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit stood next to him holding papers. My daughter pushed a pen toward my hand even though tubes were sticking out everywhere. "Mama, just write your name here. It will make everything easier," she said with a sweet smile. But her eyes looked cold like winter ice. I looked at all three of my kids standing there. They felt like people I'd never met before. I wanted to sign. My hand even moved a little. But then I remembered something. Something I did 1 month ago that nobody knew about. And right then, watching them hover over me like hungry birds, I knew I made the right choice. They thought their old mama was too weak and too trusting to protect herself. Boy, were they wrong. I had worked for 40 years, saved every penny, built something real. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it just because I was lying in a hospital bed. My name is Dorothy Chen, and I'm 71 years old. I live in a small beach town called Seagrove. For the last 25 years, I ran a bookstore right on the water. Not just any bookstore. It was a special place where people came when they were sad or lost. I had a corner with soft chairs where anyone could sit and read for free. I gave hot chocolate in the winter and lemonade in the summer. Women who lost their husbands came there. People who felt alone found friends there. I called it the Reading Lighthouse because I wanted it to be a guiding light for people in storms. Every morning, I would unlock the blue door and watch the ocean waves while the coffee machine bubbled. I knew every person who walked in. I remembered their favorite books and asked about their grandchildren. But that Tuesday morning felt different. My chest hurt when I climbed the stairs to get more books. My breath came out in short puffs like I'd been running even though I was just standing still. I ignored it for weeks because there was always another customer to help or another book order to place. That evening, I sat at my old wooden desk and stared at my computer screen. I had typed something important but never sent it. The message said, "I want to do something just for me now." No name to send it to. Just words sitting there waiting. I didn't know what that meant exactly. I just knew that the Reading Lighthouse couldn't be my whole life forever. My body was telling me to slow down, but my heart didn't want to listen. That morning I talked to my friend Margaret. She was 63 and worked at the bookstore with me for 10 years. She understood people in a way most folks don't. She noticed I was breathing funny and holding onto the counter more than usual. "Dorothy, maybe it's time to rest a bit," she said gently. Later that night, I pulled out a special folder from my desk drawer. Inside were papers about something new I was building. A foundation called Readers United. Not a business anymore. Something bigger. Something that would help people even after I was gone. 3 weeks before, I had signed papers that moved the Reading Lighthouse into this new foundation. The bookstore wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to everyone now. I hadn't told my kids. Not Tommy, not Susan, not little James who wasn't so little anymore. I kept telling myself I would tell them when the time was right. But deep down I knew I was scared. Scared of what they might do if they found out. Some of you listening probably understand this feeling. When you have something precious and you can't say it out loud because someone might try to take it away. Closed my laptop. Outside my window, the sun had gone down. All I could see was my own face looking back at me in the dark glass. I looked tired and old, but I smiled at that woman anyway. She had done something brave. The sharp smell of cleaning soap woke me up. Bright lights hurt my eyes. Something was taped under my nose helping me breathe. Plastic tubes ran down both my arms into machines. I could hear beeping noises, steady like a clock ticking. And I heard voices. Voices I knew. I couldn't turn my head much, but I could hear everything. One voice was Tommy, my oldest boy. He sounded like he was talking about business, not about his mama lying in a hospital bed. Then Susan spoke, quiet but firm, like she had practiced what to say. And James, he sounded impatient, like he had better places to be. I tried to remember how I got here. Did I fall? Did I stop breathing? I couldn't piece it together. All I knew was I wasn't home anymore. My chest felt sore and my throat hurt. But the worst pain was hearing my own children talk about me like I was already gone. She still owns everything on paper. That was James talking. If we don't move fast, we'll lose it all. Susan answered. She can't even sit up. We just need one signature. Tommy added. Maybe she'd want this done now so she doesn't have to worry. Then nobody talked for a moment that felt too planned out, too practiced. I heard a chair scrape across the floor. Footsteps came closer. Papers rustled. Someone clicked a pen open. I tried to lift my hand, but it barely wiggled. Then I felt someone touch my left hand, trying to put something in my fingers. Just hold this for her. That was Susan's voice. She didn't sound mean exactly, just empty. Like I was a problem to solve instead of her mother. The pen was pressed into my palm. My hand felt like a wet noodle. I couldn't grip anything even if I wanted to. Then Susan leaned close to my ear. Her breath smelled like coffee. Just sign your name, Mama. Then you can rest and not think about any of this stuff anymore. My eyes were open just a crack. I could see shapes, blurry figures standing around my bed. The man in the suit I didn't know stood near the door, waiting. 3 children. 3 strangers. Standing there with papers while machines beeped to keep me alive. I didn't sign. My fingers stayed loose. The pen rolled off onto the blanket. Susan picked it up and tried again. But I let my hand go limp. Tommy let out a big breath like he was annoyed with me. He said something under his breath I couldn't hear and walked out of the room. Susan and James followed him. The man in the suit left last, looking at his watch. When they were gone, I closed my eyes. Not because I was sleepy, but because the room felt colder now. Tea and cold. These were my babies. I fed them when they were tiny. I stayed up all night when they had fevers. I worked 2 jobs to buy them school clothes and birthday cakes. And now they came to my hospital bed not with flowers or kind words, but with papers and a pen, wanting me to sign away everything while I could barely breathe. I had almost given them everything once. Almost. But something inside me had whispered a warning 1 month ago. And thank God I listened. By the 3rd day in the ICU I felt stronger. The tubes were gone and I could breathe on my own. I could sit up without help. The nurses checked on me every few hours and I smiled at them, really smiled, for the first time since I got there. I had no plans to fall asleep again. Not while I still didn't know what was written on those papers my kids tried to make me sign. Margaret came to visit that afternoon. She walked in quietly carrying a paper bag with a muffin and tea from the coffee shop down the street. When she saw me sitting up, she put her hand over her heart. "Oh, thank goodness, Dorothy. I was so worried," she said. She sat in the chair next to my bed and handed me the tea. My hand shook a little but I held it tight. "They came," I said quietly. Margaret nodded like she already knew. "I thought they might. Did they bring papers?" "Yes. And a man to make it official." Margaret sat back and crossed her arms. "Tommy called the bookstore yesterday. He told our teenager who answers the phones that since you were sick, he would be taking over as the new boss. He said you gave him permission last month." My hand squeezed the paper cup so hard it crinkled. "He said I wanted him to take over management immediately. He just needed you to sign some final papers," Margaret continued. I looked out the window. All I could see from here was the parking lot and gray sky. No ocean. No books. Nothing soft or safe. Tommy always wanted more. I knew that. But I never thought he'd come for what I built while I was lying unconscious in a hospital. Susan would follow whatever Tommy said. And James would stay quiet and go along with it. Margaret watched me carefully. "You don't have to handle this alone, Dorothy." I didn't answer right away. But my mind was already moving, already planning. That night, I asked the nurse to bring me my bag. Inside was my phone, my reading glasses, and a piece of paper with my email password written on it. I logged into my email and ignored all the other messages. I went straight to the folder labeled Readers United. I read the papers again. Everything was done. The bookstore belonged to the foundation now. Not me. And definitely not my children. I had signed it all over 3 weeks ago with 2 people watching and my lawyer present. It was real and legal and finished. I opened a new note on my phone and started typing. June 10th. Sue. Tommy brought official papers and tried to get me to sign while I was barely awake. Susan was there. James helped. Nobody asked me first. Nobody explained anything. I saved it and backed it up to the cloud. Then I sent it to Margaret with no words in the subject line. The next morning, I asked the nurse for a cup of tea and told her I wanted to start walking again. She smiled big and said she'd get someone to help me. One step. Then another. I wasn't fast, but I was clear in my head. My kids thought they found the perfect moment. They thought I was too weak and too confused to stop them. What they didn't know was that I had already let go. Not of myself, but of the thing they wanted most. I didn't own it anymore. And that made me free in a way I'd never felt before. The following week, the doctor said I could go home. He gave me a small machine to wear that would watch my heart. He said I almost had a really bad heart attack, but I got lucky. He called it a close call. Called it a wake-up call. Margaret picked me up from the hospital. She brought my favorite soft sweater and a bag with soup, crackers and tea. The kind of care that doesn't ask for anything back. We barely talked on the drive home. I wasn't ready yet. Not because I was scared, but because my house would feel different now. Different because everything had changed. When I walked in my front door, the first thing I did was go to the safe in my bedroom closet. I opened it slowly even though I already knew what was inside. All the papers were still there. The documents moving the reading lighthouse to Readers United. The letters from the board saying they received everything. Every page had my signature and the date clearly written. I took photos of every single paper with my phone and saved them in a secret place online. Then I put the real papers in a fireproof box and locked it in a new safe I had installed in my bedroom wall months ago. Only me and my lawyer knew about that safe. By the next day, Susan sent me a text message. Hope you're resting. Let us know when we can visit. Tommy sent one too that just said, we should talk soon. James didn't say anything, but I knew he was waiting just like the others. I didn't reply to any of them. The day after that, I opened my email and saw a message from the bookstore's lawyer. Tommy had tried to schedule a meeting using my name. He said he had permission to make decisions about future partnerships. But he didn't have permission. That authority wasn't mine anymore, and I definitely never gave it to him. I sent the email to Margaret and attached a copy of the transfer papers. I wrote a short note. Please make sure everyone at the store knows the real situation. My children have no permission to do anything. All questions go to the board. That night, I sat in my kitchen drinking the soup Margaret made and looked out my back window. The same window where I used to watch James play basketball with his friends on summer evenings. The same yard where Susan used to have picnics with her kids when they were little. The same porch where Tommy grilled hamburgers on my birthday last year and told me I made the best potato salad in the world. It wasn't always like this. But it also didn't change overnight. Pulled out my journal. Not the one on my computer, a real paper notebook. I wrote down everything I remembered from the hospital. Every word they said. Every look on their faces. Every moment when I saw what they really wanted. I wrote the date at the top. I signed my name at the bottom. Then I turned to a clean page and made a list. Things I need to do: call my lawyer. Lock down all bookstore communication. Tell the board about Tommy's lies. Put cameras around my house. Date my medical papers. Remove emergency contacts. Change who makes decisions if I can't. Felt cold writing it all down like a checklist. But it was necessary. The next morning, I put a sealed envelope in the mail to my lawyer. On the outside it said, "Only open if Dorothy cannot make her own decisions." Inside was the complete story of everything that happened, along with a note that said, "If they come back, this is what they wanted." I didn't feel like I won anything. I just felt calm and steady, like someone who finally stopped being afraid. I survived the hospital. Now I would survive what came after on my own terms. By Sunday, I knew they would come to my house. They didn't call first to ask permission. That was typical. Tommy never thought he needed permission to show up at my door. Susan learned that same attitude over the years. James was quieter, but his silence never meant he wasn't involved. Just meant he was thinking and planning. I spent the morning like any normal day. Made tea. Turned off the porch light. Checked the mailbox. I didn't want to look like I was waiting for them. I wanted to look calm. My heart beat steady and slow. I left the front curtains open. They needed to see I wasn't hiding. The big silver car pulled into my driveway right at lunchtime. Tommy got out first, buttoning his jacket like he was going to a business meeting. Susan followed wearing fancy clothes and sunglasses even though the sky was cloudy. James got out last. He wore regular sneakers and carried a water bottle. Casual, like this was just a normal family visit. I opened the door before they could knock. They walked in without saying hello. I didn't say hello either. Tommy stood in the middle of my living room and looked around like he was checking to see what was valuable. "We need to talk, Mom," he said. His voice sounded heavy, like he thought it would make me do what he wanted. I sat down in my favorite chair by the window. They all stayed standing. That didn't bother me. Let them feel uncomfortable. Susan pulled a folder from her purse and put it on the coffee table. She didn't say anything. James looked at the folder, then at me. Tommy spoke again. "We've been thinking about your health and what happens next. The family needs clear plans and clear rules." I said nothing. He opened the folder. Inside were legal papers, lots of them. Papers giving him power to make my decisions. Papers letting them make my medical choices. A paper about shared ownership of the reading lighthouse. A paper proposing a joint bank account to manage the bookstore's money. It was all there, laid out like a generous gift, like they were inviting me into my own life. Susan finally spoke. "Just sign the first two for now. It's temporary. Just until you feel better," Rachel added softly. "It's just so we all have peace of mind. No pressure, Mama." I leaned forward slowly and closed the folder. "No," I said. Tommy's body went stiff. "You haven't even looked at them yet." "No," I said again. "I won't be signing anything today or any other day." Susan stepped back, blinking fast like she was confused. James shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Tommy stared at me. His face didn't move, but I could see his jaw tighten. His voice changed. "You're not thinking straight. This isn't about control, Mom." I stood up from my chair. "I know exactly what this is about. And you're right. It's not about control. It's about trust. The kind of trust that broke the second you brought a stranger with papers into my hospital room and tried to steal what I spent my whole life building." Nobody said a word. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. "We're done here." Susan moved first, grabbing the folder off the table. James looked like he might cry, but he didn't. Tommy hesitated. His jaw was tight and his hands were in fists. Then he walked past me without looking me in the eyes. The door closed behind them with a soft click. I locked it. Then I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the table. My hands shook for the first time all day. But it wasn't because I was scared. It was because something that had been tight inside me for years finally let go. I hadn't just refused to sign those papers. I had chosen myself, my voice, my boundary. And now, whatever came next, I would face it standing up straight. Not begging, not waiting, not hoping for kindness that didn't exist anymore. The Monday after they left, I didn't move around much. I kept the curtains closed and my phone on silent. I let the hours pass without checking the clock. I didn't clean. I didn't plan. I didn't talk. Sometimes being still isn't emptiness. It's healing. By evening I felt something shift inside me again. Not something big, just something steady. I opened the window over my kitchen sink and let the cool air come in. I started to cook. Not because I was hungry, but because I needed to smell something familiar and comforting. I made oatmeal with honey and cooked apples. I sat at my little table and ate slowly, tasting every bite. That night I called Margaret. I told her everything that happened. She didn't interrupt me or ask lots of questions. When I finished talking, she just said one thing. "I'm proud of you, Dorothy." The next morning, I took an envelope from my desk drawer. The one that said, "For the board," on the front. Inside was a copy of the full bookstore transition, a written record of my interactions with my kids, and a letter. In that letter, I explained clearly that no family member should be allowed access to the property or involved in any decisions at any level. I wasn't asking them to do me a favor. I was setting a clear boundary. I drove to the bookstore that afternoon and gave it to the board's assistant in person. I didn't stay long. I walked through the bookstore once, slowly, like I was saying goodbye to the version of myself who used to run staff meetings under the big tree outside and plant flowers along the walkway every spring. Then I left. That evening, Tommy called my phone. I let it ring until it stopped. Then Susan called. Then James. 3 calls in 1 hour. "Mom, we need to talk again. It's not too late to fix this. Can we just meet and clear the air? Please call us back." I listened to each message once. Then I deleted all of them. The next day I went back to my journal. This time I wrote about who I was before all this happened. Not the mother. Not the bookstore owner. But the little girl who grew up in a tiny apartment in Chicago with a dad who worked at the post office and a mom who made the best chicken soup when I was sick. The girl who didn't have much money but always felt loved and safe. By Friday, I had mailed 2 more important letters. One went to my lawyer to update all my important papers and confirm the trust terms. The other went to a charity that helps people taking care of aging parents. I offered to pay for 3 families to get a full year of help and support. Quietly. Secretly. I didn't need anyone to know my name. I just needed to remind myself that I still had power. Not the loud kind. Quiet kind. That weekend I cleaned out my hallway closet. Not because I was angry or trying to prove something, just to make space. I put old towels and blankets in boxes for donation. I threw away worn-out shoes and old food from the pantry. I rearranged my bookshelf and watered all my plants. Some people rebuild with hammers and nails. I was rebuilding with breath and small actions. I stopped checking the driveway for cars. I stopped keeping a bag by the door in case someone tried to force their way in. I had already left behind the version of myself that would have opened that door out of guilt. The following Monday, a big white envelope came in the mail. It needed a signature to accept it. I saw the return address before I even opened it. It was from Tommy's lawyer. I put it on my kitchen table and sat across from it for over an hour. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Even the wind outside seemed to stop moving. When I finally opened it, the papers inside were exactly what I expected. A formal request for emergency guardianship. Tommy had filed something in family court to get legal power over my money decisions. Attached were papers signed by Susan and James saying they were worried about my recent strange behavior and the danger I was causing to myself and my estate. They called it love and protection and help. But it wasn't. It was control dressed up in legal words. What surprised me wasn't what the papers said. It was how confident they were. They really believed I would give up. That I would panic. That their combined pressure would turn me back into the woman who used to make room at every holiday table for their excuses and bad behavior. But I didn't call them. I didn't yell or cry. I called my lawyer instead. By lunchtime I was sitting in her office. Her name was Patricia Wells. She had helped me with the bookstore transition and had known me long enough to read between the lines. I handed her the whole folder, including copies of my hospital records, the legal transfer documents, and my journal entry about the day they tried to force me to sign papers in the ICU. Patricia flipped through everything slowly, taking careful notes in her neat handwriting. When she finished, she looked up at me and said, "Dorothy, this isn't just a defense. This is a pattern of behavior." She was right. We started building a timeline of everything. Every text message. Every attempt to keep me away from people. Every manipulation disguised as concern. I found security camera footage from the bookstore's back entrance showing Tommy trying to get inside 2 weeks earlier when the store was closed. We filed our official response by the end of the week. Saturday came and it rained all morning. The rain tapped against my windows like little fingers. I stayed in my pajamas and slippers, moving slowly and carefully through my house. Around noon, my doorbell rang. This time I let it ring without answering. I looked through the peephole and saw James standing there holding a plate covered in aluminum foil. His hair was messy and he wore the jacket I bought him 3 Christmases ago. He waited for a full minute, shifting the plate from one hand to the other, before he turned and walked back to his car. I didn't open the door. Later that night, I sat at my table and made another list. Not about legal things or plans. Just a list of truths I had finally accepted. I am not selfish for protecting myself. I am not cruel for saying no. I am not broken because they left. I am not afraid of their silence. And I am not theirs to control. I folded that list and put it in my journal next to the other important papers. The following Monday, Patricia called me with news. The judge had looked at the first request and marked it for more review. Our evidence had been received and read. There would be a formal hearing in court, but things had already started to shift. What was once presented as a rescue mission was now being seen for what it really was. A hostile takeover. I hung up the phone and stood by my living room window. The sky had cleared up. The street was quiet and calm. Nothing dramatic happened. Just stillness. Just breath. For the first time in weeks, I smiled without feeling guarded or scared. Whatever came next, I would face it with both feet on the ground. Not as a mother being corrected. Not as an old woman being questioned. But as Dorothy Chen, whole and unbroken. And finally done waiting for permission to live her own life. On the morning of the court hearing, I got there 30 minutes early. I wore my best blue dress, the one I used to wear to important meetings and charity events. Not because I was showing off, but to remind myself who I used to be in rooms like these. A woman with strength. A woman people respected. Patricia met me on the courthouse steps. She looked calm and ready. She didn't say meaningless things to make me feel better. She just nodded and walked beside me in comfortable silence. We entered the small courtroom together. Tommy sat at the opposite side with his lawyer. Susan and James were there too, both wearing boring colors, their eyes avoiding mine. I didn't expect them to look at me. I didn't need them to anymore. The judge was a woman with gray and black hair and a serious voice. She read the case information out loud. Then she asked the lawyers to give opening statements. Tommy's lawyer spoke first. He described me as isolated, upset, and weak. He used phrases like failing judgment and outside influence taking advantage. I listened without moving because I knew what would happen next. Patricia stood up, calm and clear, and began speaking. She talked about my career, my successes, my legal rights, and medical independence. Then she showed documentation. Hospital records, voicemail messages, copies of the bookstore transfer, security camera footage showing Tommy trying to break into the bookstore without permission. She finished by reading a quote from one of my letters, the one I had written for the board. The court does not need to protect Dorothy Chen from others. It needs to protect her from the false idea that family gives anyone the right to her legacy. The judge paused for a long moment after the opening statements. Then she spoke, not to Patricia or Tommy's lawyer, but directly to me. Mrs. Chen, would you like to say anything to the court? I stood up slowly. My knees were tired but steady. I didn't read from any paper. I just said what was in my heart. I built my life carefully and with love. I gave my children more than I ever gave myself. But I will not spend my last years apologizing for wanting peace. I am not confused. I am not weak. I am awake and clear. And I am not afraid of being alone anymore. The judge nodded slowly. She paused again, then said the hearing was over for today. No decision yet. It would come in the mail. That's how these things work. Outside the courthouse, clouds hung low and gray in the sky. Patricia and I walked slowly toward the parking lot. When we got to her car, she put her hand gently on my shoulder. Dorothy, no matter what that letter says, you just took back your power in that courtroom today. I went home that afternoon and made vegetable soup. Carrots and potatoes and beans. Simple, warm, filling. I lit the candle Margaret had given me last Christmas. I didn't check the mailbox for 2 whole days. When the letter finally arrived, I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of tea beside me. The court found no reason to approve the request. The guardianship petition was completely denied. Also, the judge noted possible financial manipulation by the people who filed it and sent the matter to a separate investigation. I put the letter next to my tea and stared at it for a long time. Not because I was shocked, but because I felt something lift off my chest. Something heavy that had been sitting there for months. Later that day, I took a walk around my neighborhood. Just 2 blocks, nothing far. The air was cool and fresh. Kids were drawing pictures with colored chalk on the sidewalk. A woman walked past me with a big fluffy dog and we both smiled at each other. I didn't feel like I won a war. I just felt whole again. That night I wrote in my journal. They tried to write my ending. But the story is still mine. And I am still writing it. The letter sat next to a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. I had read it twice that morning. Not because I didn't believe it, but because something in me needed to see the words more than once. It was official and final. Not only was the guardianship request denied, but the court had opened an investigation into the financial motives behind Tommy's actions and the others. That wasn't just a victory. That was proof I had been right all along. Still, I didn't feel like celebrating. Not yet. I felt like organizing and cleaning. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through old drawers. Papers, birthday cards, bits of ribbon, old receipts. For years I had saved everything. Every thank you note from James. Every school drawing from Susan. Even the messy crayon pictures Tommy made when he was still tiny and sweet. I put a few things in a box labeled "Maybe Later," and the rest I quietly let go of. That evening I made dinner for one. Roasted vegetables, brown rice, and a few apple slices. I set the table the way I used to when guests were coming over. Not out of habit but out of respect. Respect for myself. Then I lit a small candle and opened my calendar. The date was circled in red pen. In 2 weeks, the Reading Lighthouse was having a big community celebration dinner. It was supposed to be a party. Tommy had once suggested using the event to announce that he was taking over my estate. He thought it would be his moment to shine as my successor. But I hadn't cancelled the event. I had just changed who was invited. No family members. No heirs. No big announcements. Instead, I invited every single person who had once been turned away or ignored when the Reading Lighthouse became more exclusive and expensive. The retired teachers who used to bring struggling students but stopped coming when prices went up. The nurses who had asked to use the space for support groups. The woman from the local shelter who had emailed me 4 times before she gave up. I wrote to each person individually and told them the truth. This was no longer a family business. This was a gift to the community. Over the next few days, replies started coming in. Some were short and polite. Others made me cry happy tears. A woman named Sharon wrote to say her sister had found comfort during a book reading at my store 8 years ago. Another woman, a grandmother raising her daughter's 2 kids, said she never imagined being able to step foot in such a beautiful place. That was when I knew I had made the right choice. I also knew Tommy would find out. And he did. 3 days before the event, he showed up without warning. No lawyer. No Susan. Just him, standing at the edge of my driveway with both hands in his jacket pockets. I didn't invite him inside. He asked me calmly why I was doing this. Why I was throwing away the vision we had built together. Why I was making everything so personal. I listened quietly. Then I told him it was never personal. It was necessary. I had spent too many years confusing love with obedience. And I wouldn't do it anymore. He stared at me. Not angry, just empty, like someone looking at a house they used to live in but don't recognize anymore. Before he left, he said one thing. "You won't have anything left for us when this is over." I looked him straight in the eyes. "That's exactly the point, Tommy." Then I closed the door. The silence that followed wasn't empty or sad. It was clean and whole. For the first time in months, I didn't worry about the phone ringing. I didn't jump at footsteps outside. I just stood in that quiet moment and let it hold me gently. And in that stillness I smiled. Not because I had won some game but because I had finally chosen myself. The night of the community dinner came quietly. I had spent the morning baking a lemon cake and ironing my favorite yellow dress. It wasn't new or fancy, but it was mine. I wore it when the Reading Lighthouse first opened to the public all those years ago. It felt right to wear it again now. At 5 o'clock, the sun began to set behind the hill. The garden lights around the bookstore flickered on one by one. The soft sound of chairs being arranged on the patio drifted through the evening air. I watched from the side door as the guests began arriving. A woman with silver hair stepped out of her car holding a little boy's hand. A man still wearing his post office uniform. A woman in a wheelchair pushed forward slowly by her teenage granddaughter. None of them were dressed fancy. None of them expected anything. Inside the bookstore, long tables were covered in simple white cloths. On each plate, I had placed a small handwritten card that said, "You belong here." That was all it needed to say. I stayed by the entrance as everyone came inside. I greeted each person not like I was the boss or the owner, but like someone who was simply grateful to see them again. Then I walked up to the small microphone we had set up near the fireplace. Not because I had prepared a big speech, but because something needed to be said out loud. I told them about the early days of the Reading Lighthouse. About how it was never supposed to be closed off or expensive. About how I had lost my way somewhere along the journey and forgotten what truly mattered. And how I had now chosen, fully and finally, to return it to its original heart and purpose. I told them the bookstore was now held by a community foundation. That the legal papers were signed and complete. That there would be no family fights over it, no sneaky tricks, no way to reverse what had been done. The Reading Lighthouse would belong to the people who needed it most forever. For a few seconds after I finished speaking, nobody clapped or cheered. Then slowly, one person stood up from their chair. Then another. Then another. They didn't say anything. They just stood there with tears running down their faces and their hands at their sides, like they were honoring something precious that had been taken away and was now being given back. I stepped away from the microphone. I didn't need to say anything more. That night, after everyone had gone home and the candles had burned down to nothing, I walked through each room of the bookstore slowly. The main reading area. The children's corner. The tiny window seat where I used to drink my morning coffee before opening the door. Each space held memories carved deep into its walls, but none of them owned me anymore. Got home just after midnight. My shoes were dusty from walking on the gravel path. My hair had come loose from its clip. My voice was rough from hours of gentle conversations. But I felt lighter than I had felt in years. On my kitchen counter was a small white envelope. No name on it, just tape there waiting for me. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. Susan's handwriting. It said, "I didn't understand before. I still don't really. But I'm sorry, Mama." No demands. No request. No signature. Just one simple line. One small line that felt like someone finally letting go. I placed it gently in the kitchen drawer by the stove. Not because I forgave her completely yet, but because reading it didn't hurt anymore. That was the beginning of something new and different. Not a big reunion or a happy ending tied up with a bow, but a release. A letting go. And in that release, I found a peace that didn't come from winning or proving anyone wrong. It came from the choice to walk away from the story they tried to write for me and to finally, bravely, begin writing my own. About a week after the community dinner, another letter came in the mail. Real paper, no return address. It had been sent to the bookstore first and then forwarded to my home. I almost threw it away, thinking it was just another complaint or question. But something about the handwriting caught my eye. Slanted and sharp. Familiar. I opened it carefully. It was from Tommy. He didn't start with Mom or Dear Mother. Just Dorothy. He wrote that he had driven past the Reading Lighthouse the week before and seen people walking freely through the front gates. He said he parked his car across the street and watched as a woman in a wheelchair was pushed down the path by her daughter. He said he recognized her from a memory he didn't even realize he still had. He said something turned in his stomach when he saw that. Not guilt exactly. Not regret. But something slower and deeper. Crack in something hard. Then, in 2 sentences that sat right in the middle of the page, he admitted he had known about the foundation transfer before the dinner event happened. He had seen the legal paperwork, heard the filings, even overheard one of the community volunteers talking about it at a coffee shop near his office. But he hadn't believed I would actually go through with it. He thought I would give in like I always had before. His words, not mine. He ended the letter by saying he wasn't asking for anything from me. Just that he understood now. Not why I did it, but that I had every right to do it. That part somehow meant more to me than an apology would have. I sat with the letter for a long time. Not reading it over and over, just holding it in my hands, letting the weight of those sentences settle into my heart. Later that day, I visited the wooden bench by the garden outside the bookstore. The same bench where I used to sit and wait while the very first customers arrived all those years ago. I watched an older man gently tie a scarf around his wife's neck because the breeze was cool. She smiled at him without saying a single word. There was no big moment. No applause or recognition. Just life continuing on exactly as it was always meant to. That night I called Margaret. She answered quickly, her voice softer than usual. I told her about Tommy's letter. Told her I wasn't sure what it meant or if it even meant anything at all. But I needed to say it out loud to someone who had stood beside me when everything was at its darkest and scariest. She didn't speak for a while. Then she said she'd noticed something shift in Susan too. A kind of silence that wasn't cold or angry, just careful and cautious. And I said quietly, maybe that's enough for now. Sometimes all you get is a little space. Not closure. Not healing. Just a little more room to breathe and be yourself. The next morning I found myself back at the community room in the bookstore. Not for work or business. Not for meetings. Just to sit quietly and listen. A woman was sharing her story about how she left her marriage after 28 years. About how her children still didn't speak to her, but she was learning to sit with that pain. Learning to not let it define who she was. I didn't say anything to her, but when our eyes met across the room, I nodded slowly. I think she understood what I meant without words. Sometimes the best stories aren't the loud dramatic ones. They're the quiet ones that end with no one watching and no one cheering. Just a single moment of stillness. A moment when you finally realize you're not waiting to be saved anymore. You already saved yourself. The snow came early that year. It covered the tops of the pine trees and rested softly along the railing of my back porch. I stood there one cold morning with a mug of hot apple cider, watching the light stretch slowly across the ocean in the distance. The air was perfectly still. The kind of stillness you only learn to love after you've lived through enough noise and chaos. Inside my house, the fireplace crackled gently. I had no emails waiting for me. No board meetings to prepare for. No problems to solve. Just a quiet Sunday morning. A life I had carefully carved back from all the chaos and pressure. The peace wasn't perfect. Some days I still heard echoes from the past. Voices, memories, moments of doubt. But they didn't control my thoughts anymore. They passed through my mind like wind slipping under a door. Felt for a moment but not feared. I had an invitation sitting on my kitchen counter from a woman named Diane. She had joined the community program at the bookstore a few months earlier after her son placed her in a nursing home and never visited again. Diane now taught pottery classes to the other members. Real pottery with clay and wheels and glazes. She never called it therapy or healing art. She said it was just about shaping something with your own 2 hands that nobody else could shape for you. I didn't attend her class that day. But I walked over to the bookstore that afternoon just to watch quietly through the window. Inside, people were laughing. Not loud, fake laughter. Real free laughter. I stayed outside with my hands tucked in my coat pockets, my heart feeling lighter than I could remember it being in a very long time. Later, as I walked the path back home, I passed a stone bench someone had carved with words. I stopped to read it even though I'd walked past that bench 100 times before. No one can give you your voice back. You take it when you're ready. I had never noticed those words before, even though the bench had been there for years. I stood there longer than I planned, staring at the stone like it was speaking directly to my soul. That night, I opened the locked drawer in my bedroom nightstand. Inside was the original letter from Tommy, the one I had read weeks ago and tucked away. I didn't rip it up. I didn't burn it or throw it away. I read it again, this time more slowly, letting each word sink in. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside a journal I had started keeping a few weeks earlier. Not to write about them or their mistakes, but to write about me, about my journey, about my voice. The story wasn't over. It wasn't neat or perfectly resolved or wrapped up in a pretty bow. But it was mine again, fully and completely mine. And that was more than enough. If this story touched your heart, even for just a few minutes, thank you for listening. Sometimes healing doesn't come from a perfect happy ending. It comes from telling your story out loud and letting it land exactly where it needs to. If any part of Dorothy's journey felt familiar to you, or reminded you of your own quiet strength and courage, please know you're not alone. I'd love to hear what part of her story stayed with you the most. Drop a comment below and let me know. Your story matters too, and your voice deserves to be heard. This is Granny's voice, reminding you that it's never too late to choose yourself. Until next time, take care of your heart.